Okay, so now most of you are here of the Wheel of Time season 3, and naturally, there are some questions that you definitely have, particularly in regards to the events like the breaking of the world and other law in the Wheel of Time. Now, according to the poll I put out recently, the breaking of the world seems to be one of the things that a lot of you want to see covered. That's pretty much what we'll be covering today. Now, we're going to start with the Age of Legends. The Age of Legends is basically an age of peace, right? Science and magic. The Aes Sedai, which were in this case both men and women who could channel the one power, Saidin and Saidar respectively, served as humanity's healers, scholars, and builders. Now, this situation of the world was pretty much what you'd consider a cosmic heaven, right? Think of the science and magic and an advanced human race in general. There were conflicts and crimes, but they were minimal and quickly resolved. We had flying cars and the works, right? Now, but in the pursuit of knowledge, the researchers at Colundam, one of the institutions, among them were mainly Meren Eronai, who we know as Momi Lanfear, and Beardomon, accidentally drilled a hole in the pattern, right? And put simply, they were looking for a new source of power, right? That they could be used by both men and women alike. That was basically accessible to everyone. But instead, what they found was the ball, thin spot in the Dark One's prism. Now, the immediate impact was at the Sharom. If you remember from the series, the Sharom was that big glowing silver ball where Pierre was in when Rand was seen back in his memories in Rhuidean in season 3, episode 4, was broken, and the area around the ball became immediately hostile and barren, right? And became what we now know as Shire Gu. Now, at first, the other changes were subtle. The Dark One's touch spread, corrupting the hearts and minds of the people, slowly making them more violent. But over time, powerful Aes Sedai joined them, right, becoming what we now know as the 13 Forsaken, which were generals and leaders of power. And what this eventually led to is what we know as the War of Power. Standing at the forefront of the light was Lewis Terran Telemon, the first among the servants, the commander of the forces of the light, the most powerful male Aes Sedai alive. And we now know him as the Dragon, right? He was basically leading humanity during this war. Bear in mind that humanity didn't use the power to fight previously to this. This was something rather new. They had to learn how to use the one power to fight. Now, as the shadow advanced and the world broke under its weight, the Aes Sedai Council were desperate for a solution, right? You can pretty much understand it. The female Aes Sedai, led by figures such as Latra Posse, you can remember her as the Aes Sedai who gave the Sarkhanen to Rand in the memories he saw on Rhuidean in season 3, episode 4, right? She proposed a long-term strategy. She wanted the completion of something referred to as the Choden Cow, which is two massive sangreal, one and two to Saidin for men and another to Saida for women, and she wanted to use them together in a coordinated strike to seal the ball with overwhelming force and the appropriate balance. Lewis Theron Telemon, on the other hand, opted for an all-out assault on the Dark One, right? Frontal assault on Shao Gu to seal the ball with the aid of both the male and female Aes Sedai. Now, Latroposi was in opposition to this plan, right? She convinced others and all the other women to refuse to aid him, and she even went as far as securing the pledge known as the Faithful Concord from the female Aes Sedai not to participate in any joint action unless the Choden Cow were used. However, Lewis Terran believed that there was no time left, the Shadow was too close to victory, and that the Choden Cow would not be finished in time, and the Dark One's forces grew bolder with each passing day. So, irrespective of the lack of support from the female Aes Sedai, he pushed forward. Now, as a little aside, while Lewis might seem impatient in his planning, his plan and rationale did have a lot of merit to it. In fact, both factions had a lot of merit to their plans. For Lewis, the Shadow had steadily been poaching the forces of the light, and you have to understand this. First, it was normal everyday men being corrupted and turning to the dark and swearing oaths. Then it became Aes Sedai. At least we know of at least 13 of immense power who held high positions in the light. Some of the Forsaken were generals, and most were people who had access to crucial and confidential information about the strategy and infrastructure of the people of the light. So the light wasn't just bleeding resources and manpower, it was losing strategic advantage as well, and this was the crux behind Lewis' reasoning, right? Now, when Lewis and his what we now know as the 100 companions, which were actually 113 Aes Sedai, and along with the army of 10,000, launched a surprise assault on Shire Gu, the site of the ball, they succeeded, right? They did. I mean, they did. They placed 7 Quendela seals around the ball, reforging the Dark One's prison. But at the moment of triumph, the Dark One struck back, right? With a burst of power, the Dark One tainted Sidon, the male half of the One Power. Lewis Terran and his remaining 68 companions went mad instantly. But this wasn't just the companions. Every male channel alive, from the greatest Aes Sedai to the humblest wielder, all of them were doomed for madness. The madness spread gradually, an insidious unraveling of reason. Like, first came the paranoia, and then the delusion, and then finally, flat out destruction. Now, men which were mad with power and grief, the male Aes Sedai, began to destroy everything. Cities just burned in unnatural fires. Rivers were boiled out or turned to stone. Mountains were hurled into the sky. Oceans, the entire infrastructure of the planet essentially broke, right? One by one, each of the 100 companions, or rather the 68 left, unleashed devastation in their madness, right? Some were hunted down by Aes Sedai who remained untouched or by the taint. Others were killed by their own power because they drew too much of the power. Lewis actually retreated into seclusion, right? He wasn't really aware of what was happening to him. But in his madness, he killed his wife, his children, and everyone else that he loved. He just wandered around, broken, and this was until he was confronted by Ishamael, the one we know as Betrayer of Hope, or Tedrod Edonai, and the chief among the Forsaken, right? Who was partially released from the bow. Now, Ishi restored Lewis' sanity to Glut for just a moment, just enough for Lewis to see what he had done. Think of it as a way to taunt him one final time, to just taunt the hell out of the man. And Lewis Terran was so overcome with despair that he drew in Sidon to the fullest extent, so much more than even he could handle, and he destroyed himself in a fiery explosion. That explosion created Dragonmount, a towering volcano, and if you've heard of that Dragonmount from the series, it's where Rand was born. Now, the breaking lasted for centuries, right? It wasn't just a one-time thing. During that entire destruction, civilization collapsed, kingdoms vanished, languages died, cultures were lost. I mean, the female Aes Sedai did their best to try and maintain some modicum of order, but tracking down the surviving channelers and even the new ones popping up or killing them if necessary was a difficult task. The Chosen Khal eventually was made, but it was too late. Eventually, they were just hidden and buried, one in Kaihen and one across the Arid Ocean. Age of Legends ended and the world pretty much broke into something entirely new. As an aside, it's important to understand that the male channelers were so much of a problem, particularly because they weren't really looking at their own safety. The male channelers drew in so much of the power, and they were basically like kamikaze pilots, right? They were basically like walking time bombs that could just go ahead and just detonate themselves at any point. And this is an important part to note. This is what makes it so much more difficult for the female Aes Sedai to deal with the male Aes Sedai, because they were basically suicide bombers who would just go crazy and blow each other up at any point in time, right? I hope this video has been helpful to you, and if it has, a like and a subscribe would really help the wheel. Until next time, the wheel wheels as the wheel weaves.